Welcome to this critical analysis of Tom Campbell's information theoretic mysticism. In this presentation, we'll deconstruct Campbell's ambitious My Big Toe, or theory of everything, and examine why his system, despite its technical veneer, collapses under rigorous first principles analysis. We'll explore how a former NASA physicist's digital cosmology ultimately reveals itself as something far more familiar to the student of mysticism than to the student of physics. Before we dive into the critique itself, let's establish exactly what we're examining and why it matters. Campbell's work represents a fascinating case study in how modern digital metaphors can be used to repackage ancient metaphysical claims. At the heart of this critique is a fundamental deception. Campbell markets his system as rigorous, first principles systems analysis, empirical laboratory physics dressed in the sterile vocabulary of science. But what functions beneath this veneer is something entirely different: deeply subjective, altered state gnosis, an unmediated cosmic holism far more characteristic of a profound psychedelic experience than of particle physics. The grand deception lies precisely here, in passing off mystical revelation as mathematically sound conclusions of objective physical science. This isn't a critique of mysticism itself, but of the dishonest packaging of mysticism as physics. Before we can critique Campbell's system, we must understand exactly what he claims. His digital ontology rests on a tightly integrated sequence of foundational assertions that attempt to reduce ontology, cosmic teleology, and human ethics to digital information processing. Let's examine these claims systematically. Campbell's foundational claim is that consciousness itself is the fundamental substrate of reality. As he states, quote, "Consciousness is the primary reality, while the physical universe is a subset of it. The ultimate source of existence is what he calls the larger consciousness system, a vast, self-contained, and evolving digital information system. Under this paradigm, reality becomes an evolving information system, where individual consciousnesses, including humans, play roles in a larger, interconnected whole. This is the first and most important assertion upon which everything else depends." Building on this foundation, Campbell asserts that what humans perceive as the objective physical universe is actually a computed reality generated by the central server of the LCS. He explicitly uses video game logic to map our daily experience. In his own words, "This thing we call the physical universe is actually a virtual reality, and the computer is consciousness. You and I were both pieces of consciousness, and we log on to this human body as our avatar. We make all the choices for the avatar. Human beings are classified as individualized units of consciousness, operating under what he calls a strict rule set, which is what we call science. The physical universe operates on video game logic. We are not physical bodies. We are conscious units logging into a server." Perhaps most remarkably, Campbell assigns an explicit evolutionary objective to this setup: the reduction of system entropy. He radically redefines traditional human emotions using information theory metrics, stating that spirituality and love are technically defined as functions of entropy content within consciousness. Under his model, high entropy is defined as chaos, disorder, selfishness, ego, and fear, while low entropy represents order, cooperation, trust, optimization, and love. Campbell summarizes the human directive bluntly: "Your mission is to grow up. It's to lower your entropy. It's to become love. That's your mission. That's what you're here for." The physical simulation, he claims, was engineered by the LCS to serve as an interactive, high-stakes learning lab. Finally, to bridge his model with quantum mechanics, Campbell claims that the universe operates exactly like a multiplayer online video game optimizing server bandwidth. Environmental assets are not calculated or stored when unobserved. The physical universe remains a wave of mathematical probabilities until a conscious observer interacts with it. Consequently, the collapse of the wave function is interpreted literally as the LCS rendering and delivering localized data packets to a player's individualized unit of consciousness, rather than an objective physical transition occurring in an independent material world. The collapse is not an objective physical transition. It is the LCS participatory rendering engine operating like a multiplayer online game. With Campbell's claims clearly established, we can now examine their structural integrity. When analyzed from a first principles perspective, Campbell's model suffers from three devastating, fatal contradictions. Let's examine each in turn. Campbell's system contains three irreconcilable contradictions. the direct physics contradiction, the semantic category error, and the broken link of systemic inheritance. Each of these alone would be fatal to his model. Together, they reveal a system that cannot withstand critical scrutiny. The first and most devastating contradiction lies in Campbell's direct violation of the second law of thermodynamics. Campbell claims that the physical universe is a virtual sandbox engineered to help systems and individuals lower their total entropy. However, in the actual, observed physical universe, total thermodynamic entropy in a closed system is relentlessly and irreversibly increasing. The cosmos is expanding, stars are burning out, and reality is marching toward a state of maximum disorder, the heat death of the universe. If a brilliant, self-optimizing cosmic engineer built a simulation specifically to reduce entropy, designing its underlying code on physical rules that guarantee entropy increases until the system freezes to death, represents an absurdly unexplained and self-contradictory engineering design failure. The LCS is running a machine that actively hemorrhages the very metric it is trying to conserve. The second fatal flaw is what we might call a semantic category error. Campbell treats a rigorous mathematical and statistical formula, Shannon informational entropy or thermodynamic entropy, as a literal metaphor for human psychology. He collapses physical states, informational bit streams, and complex mammalian emotions like fear, ego, love, and cooperation into the exact same word, entropy. Crucially, he provides absolutely no dimensional analysis, metric, or mathematical scale. There is no conversion rate to explain how many bits of Shannon entropy equal 1 unit of human ego, or how a joule per Kelvin of thermodynamic entropy translates to an act of human kindness. Without a scale, his use of the word ceases to be physics. It becomes a pseudo-scientific projection designed to make subjective moral preferences sound like objective mathematics. The third contradiction involves what we might call the broken link of systemic inheritance. In any robust systems engineering architecture, a partitioned subsystem or subroutine inherently inherits the foundational properties, constraints, and operational code of the parent system. If humans are literal fragments of a singular fundamental entity whose absolute evolutionary drive is to lower entropy, that drive should be our baseline, hardwired, and unalterable nature. Lowering entropy, cooperating, loving, should be as automatic and instinctual to human consciousness as gravity is to a physical mass. Instead, Campbell claims that humans manifest in a state of high entropy, fear, and ego, and must spend countless simulated lifetimes trying to grow up and code their way back to optimization. He provides no logical mechanism to explain why an optimized, low-entropy cosmic mainframe would spawn subroutines that are fundamentally decoupled from its own core processing logic. Because Campbell's model fails both the empirical laws of physics and the internal logical rules of systems engineering, we must ask, how did a trained physicist arrive at such a deeply flawed, highly specific conclusion? The answer lies in tracking his actual methodology. Campbell's data collection did not occur in a particle physics laboratory. It took place in the 1970s at the Monroe Institute, where he spent decades researching out-of-body experiences, astral projection, and altered states of consciousness. The structure of My Big Toe perfectly mirrors the classic topology of a profound psychedelic or mystical experience. During a deep ego-dissolving state, such as a trip induced by certain substances, the human mind frequently experiences an overwhelming, unmediated sense that all is one, reality is a grand illusion, and the fundamental force of the universe is love. Having identified the origin of Campbell's insights, we can now see how he attempted to reconcile his mystical experience with the mundane reality that contradicts it. When Campbell sobered up and attempted to translate this profound subjective mysticism into the language of his day job, systems engineering and digital computing, he ran into an immediate logical wall. The mundane, everyday world does not look like an all-loving oneness. It is full of war, ego, chaos, and suffering. To patch this massive discrepancy, Campbell was forced to invent a series of ad hoc rationalizations. Because the everyday world is chaotic, it must be a simulation. Because the oneness felt like optimization, love must mean low entropy. Because humans act with ego, the simulation must be an intentional moral simulator, designed to make us work our way back to the oneness. These patches are not derived from evidence. They are engineered to preserve a prior mystical commitment. Once we see this patching process clearly, a deeper pattern emerges. Because some humans blatantly refuse to follow this universal rule of optimization, Campbell is forced to frame them as unevolved, high-entropy noise within the machine. By doing so, he accidentally reinvents ancient theology. The larger consciousness system is a repackaged theological god. The simulation is the fallen, material world. Lowering entropy is earning salvation, and high entropy is a digital rendering of sin. His physics background is merely a clever cookie cutter, used to shape a shamanic revelation into an intellectual product that appeals to a technologically obsessed Western mind. The theological architecture is ancient, only the vocabulary is new. Having examined Campbell's claims, identified their fatal contradictions, and traced their true origins, we can now draw our conclusions about what this system truly represents and what it is not. A rigorous first principles analysis reveals that the math does not balance. The terms are conceptually conflated, and the physical laws are directly contradicted by the universe we actually inhabit. Ultimately, Campbell's grand digital ontology is an illusion. The white lab coat and the computer terminal are just stage dressing. Once you brush aside the data streams and server metaphors, you are left with a purely mystical, Gnostic recipe. It is a potent, psychedelic brew of cosmic oneness and ancient spiritual moralism. Campbell's physics soup doesn't taste like science because it isn't science. It tastes like mushrooms. This analysis does not invalidate mystical or psychedelic insight as such. Had Campbell presented his work as a modern Gnostic philosophy, a thoughtful synthesis of shamanic revelation and digital metaphor, it would merit serious consideration as a valuable lens for exploring subjective consciousness. His error is not mysticism, it is the claim that mysticism is physics. There is a legitimate domain for his ideas, but that domain is philosophy and subjective exploration, not empirical science. His framework catastrophically fails the empirical and systemic thresholds required for any serious claim to be a scientific theory of everything. The study of consciousness deserves better than pseudoscience disguised in the vocabulary of physics. Welcome to the supplementary notes for our critical analysis of Tom Campbell's information theoretic mysticism. This presentation serves as an educational companion to the preceding critique, isolating the specific logical fallacies Campbell commits and clarifying the scientific and systems engineering concepts he misappropriates. Each entry follows a standard pedagogical format: definition, explanation, analogy, and why it matters, or, more specifically, Campbell's error. Let's begin our diagnostic audit of the larger consciousness system. This is a systematic deconstruction of methodological anomalies in Campbell's work. Our goal is not merely to criticize, but to educate, to show precisely where Campbell's reasoning breaks down and why his conclusions do not follow from his premises. We'll examine 6 distinct logical fallacies and 2 key scientific concepts that Campbell fundamentally misunderstands or misappropriates. Let's begin by examining the logical fallacies that undermine Campbell's framework. These are not minor issues of wording. They are fundamental errors in reasoning that invalidate his conclusions, regardless of whether his premises are accepted. Fallacy number 1. The category mistake. This involves misattributing properties that belong to one category of things to another entirely different category. Campbell takes a rigorous mathematical and statistical formula, thermodynamic entropy, or Shannon information entropy, and applies it as a literal descriptor for complex mammalian emotions like fear, ego, and love. He treats a physical metric as if it were a psychological and ethical substance. Consider this analogy: judging the emotional sadness of a symphony by measuring the average decibel level of its volume. The metric, loudness, belongs to acoustics. The quality, sadness, belongs to aesthetics. They share a physical medium but have no dimensional equivalence. Why does this matter? By conflating these categories, Campbell smuggles subjective moral preferences into the language of objective physics. Without a dimensional conversion rate, such as joules per Kelvin equals 1 unit of kindness, his use of entropy ceases to be science and becomes pseudoscientific projection. Fallacy number 2, the false equivalence. This treats 2 conceptually distinct phenomena as if they were identical or functionally interchangeable. Campbell equates the quantum mechanical wave function, a mathematical description of probability amplitudes in an objective physical framework, with a video game server rendering assets on the fly to save bandwidth. He also equates unobserved quantum states with unrendered game polygons. This is like saying a dark cloud depicted in a painting is the same as a literal storm cloud, because both are described with the word dark. The map quantum math is treated as the territory, a literal rendering engine. Why does this matter? This equivalence allows Campbell to retrofit quantum mechanics into his simulation narrative without justification. It ignores that the mathematical formalism of quantum mechanics makes no reference to servers, avatars, or data packets. It is a statistical tool, not an engineering blueprint. Fallacy number 3, the non sequitur, a conclusion that does not logically follow from its premises. Campbell's central argument follows a broken chain. Premise: during altered states, I experienced unmediated cosmic oneness and felt that love is the fundamental force. Conclusion: therefore, the physical universe is objectively a digital simulation running on a cosmic server, and my moral duty is to lower my entropy. This is like tasting the vivid sweetness of an apple in a lucid dream, and concluding that your physical refrigerator must now be full of apples. A subjective internal experience does not entail an objective external ontological structure. Why does this matter? The conclusion is vastly overdetermined by the premise. Campbell's leap from a first-person mystical state to a third-person digital physics is unjustified. The non sequitur forces him to invent ad hoc rationalizations to bridge the gap. Fallacy number 4, explanatory inflation, sometimes called the metaphysical tax. This involves adding complex, unobservable entities or processes to a theory without increasing its actual explanatory or predictive power over the phenomena it seeks to account for. Campbell introduces the entire larger consciousness system, individualized units of consciousness, a cosmic rendering engine, and a thermodynamic moral simulator to explain human experience. Yet he leaves all observed physical laws, gravity, electromagnetism, quantum mechanics, exactly as they are. He explains the universe by positing an even larger, more complex universe that generates it. This is like explaining how a mechanical clock works, by positing an invisible, infinitely complex wizard inside the casing who magically turns the gears. The wizard explains nothing, because the wizard himself requires the same kind of explanation as the clock. Why does this matter? Campbell's ontology pays a massive metaphysical tax. It multiplies entities unnecessarily, while delivering zero novel, testable predictions about the physical world. Occam's razor alone should favor simpler physicalist or neutral monist frameworks over his sprawling digital mythology. Fallacy number 5, ad hoc rescue. This involves adding unsupported auxiliary assumptions to a theory specifically to protect it from contradictory evidence or internal inconsistencies. When Campbell's mystical revelation of all-loving oneness collides with the observable reality of war, suffering, ego, and chaos, he does not reconsider his conclusion. Instead, he retroactively claims that the simulation was intentionally designed as a high-stakes learning lab to teach us to overcome that chaos. He patches the contradiction by asserting that the chaos is the point, a feature, not a bug. This is like a broken clock that shows the wrong time being defended by its owner saying, "It's not broken, it's intentionally displaying the wrong time to teach me patience." This allows any evidence against the clock's accuracy to be reinterpreted as evidence for its pedagogical genius. Why does this matter? The learning lab defense is unfalsifiable. It transforms every instance of failure, cruelty, or cosmic entropy into a deliberate teaching tool. This protects Campbell's theory from empirical disconfirmation, while providing zero independent evidence for the teaching hypothesis itself. Fallacy number 6, unfalsifiability, closely related to shifting the burden of proof. A claim is unfalsifiable when no conceivable observation or experiment could prove it false. Campbell asserts we live in a simulation generated by the LCS. However, any experimental result we might produce, discovering a new particle, confirming a cosmological model, can simply be dismissed as part of the simulation's rule set. If the simulation appears perfectly consistent, that consistency is just good coding. No possible physics experiment could ever return a result that says, "This is not a simulation." Campbell further shifts the burden by demanding that skeptics prove consciousness is not fundamental, or that reality is not a simulation. This is like claiming there is an invisible, intangible, silent dragon living in your garage. When asked to prove it, you respond, "You can't prove it isn't there." The burden rests on the claimant to provide evidence for the dragon, not on the skeptic to prove its absence. Why does this matter? Unfalsifiable claims are not scientific theories. They are metaphysical positions. By presenting his simulation hypothesis as a rigorous scientific conclusion, Campbell violates the core demarcation criterion of science, falsifiability, and inappropriately shifts the epistemic burden onto his critics. Having examined the logical fallacies in Campbell's reasoning, let's now turn to 2 key scientific concepts that he fundamentally misunderstands or misappropriates. These are not matters of interpretation, they are matters of established science. Key concept number 1, thermodynamic versus informational entropy. In thermodynamics, entropy is a state function measuring the number of microscopic configurations consistent with a system's macroscopic state. In information theory, Shannon entropy measures the uncertainty or information content of a message, expressed in bits. Both forms are strictly quantitative metrics applied to physical systems, energy dispersal, or data streams, probability distributions. They have rigorous units, joules per Kelvin, bits, and mathematical properties. They do not intrinsically carry moral, emotional, or ethical content. Campbell's error is treating entropy as a universal proxy for morality, equating low entropy with love and cooperation, and high entropy with fear and ego, without any formal derivation, dimensional analysis, or scaling mechanism. This is a rhetorical flourish, not a physical law. As the critique demonstrates, total thermodynamic entropy in a closed system must increase, directly contradicting Campbell's claimed teleology of entropy reduction. Key concept number 2, systemic inheritance. This is a fundamental principle of systems engineering. In robust systems architecture, any partitioned subsystem, module, subroutine, or agent must inherit the fundamental properties, constraints, operational logic, and base-level code of its parent system. A subsystem cannot be fundamentally decoupled from its source architecture unless an explicit decoupling mechanism is specified. If a computer program spawns a child process, that child process runs on the same CPU, uses the same operating system, and adheres to the same core instruction set. It does not spontaneously develop a new physics or an opposing prime directive. Campbell's error here is devastating. His individualized units of consciousness are explicitly described as partitioned fragments or subroutines of the larger consciousness system. Yet, while the LCS is defined as a low-entropy, optimized, loving system, the IUOCs, that's us, manifest as high-entropy, ego-driven, fearful beings. Campbell provides no mechanism to explain this fundamental decoupling. If we inherit the LCS's core logic, we should be born low entropy. Since we are not, his systems engineering metaphor collapses under its own weight. Let's summarize the diagnostic audit. The simulation ontology suffers from false equivalence. Quantum mechanics is not video game rendering, and unfalsifiability, with the rule set shielding it from any possible disconfirmation while placing the epistemic burden incorrectly on critics. The morality as physics component commits the category mistake and non sequitur, leaping from subjective experience to objective ontology while misappropriating thermodynamic and Shannon entropy. And the cosmic chaos and purpose component suffers from explanatory inflation and ad hoc rescue, inventing the learning lab to explain away contradiction while failing to account for systemic inheritance, the decoupling failure between the LCS and its supposed subroutines. The conclusion is clear. Campbell's framework operates not as a predictive scientific theory, but as a metaphysical mythology shielded by logical loopholes.